Hi, this is Steve with OS Nexus, and in this video we're going to go through setting up a secure QuantaStor scale-out cluster configuration. QuantaStor is a software-defined storage platform that enables you to secure your storage environment to make it compliant with a number of government standards, including HIPAA, GDPR, and CJIS compliant. And what we're going to do in this video is go through each aspect of the configuration process and go through that so you've got a good understanding of how to set that up properly on your own QuantaStor systems. For those that are unfamiliar with QuantaStor, QuantaStor is a scale-out software-defined storage platform that bare metal installs onto commodity x86 servers and can also install on virtual machines and can form storage grids out of a combination of both physical servers and virtual machines to form grids that can span sites and data centers so that you can build hybrid clouds. And it's super important for organizations that are in regulated industries. And so if you are in law enforcement, you must be CJIS compliant in the United States. If you are in healthcare, you must be HIPAA compliant in the United States. And in Europe, it needs to be GDPR compliant. And NIST provides the standards by which these various organizations they point to and say it must be at a certain level of NIST compliance to like the NIST 800-171 standard. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through each of these areas that are really covered as requirements as part of these different government standards and how to go set up QuantaStor to meet those requirements. So we're going to start with on-the-wire encryption. So that one's real simple. QuantaStor uses on-the-wire encryption for all communication between all of the different QuantaStor systems. And whether you're logging in through the web interface or it's the internode communication with QuantaStor systems, that's all SSL, TLS 1.2 encrypted. So I've got some systems set up and we're going to log into a grid here of 3 systems, QS 90, 91, and 97. One of the key areas to go to when you're setting up a QuantaStor grid in a high security environment is to go to the Users and Groups tab and choose Security Manager. That's going to bring up this dialog. And if you choose Suggested Defaults, this is going to set it to the NIST 800-171 standard. What you're going to see in there is rules around the minimum and maximum password length. You're going to see information indicating how many login attempts until a short lockout. In this case, 5 bad logins will keep the user logged out for a few minutes. Login attempts until complete lockout of the account until the administrator logs back in is 20. And so these kinds of rules make sure that if somebody's trying to hack an account, they're not going to be able to do that. They're not going to be able to try very many combinations before the account is just fully locked. Days until the password expires. Some of these organizations, they want the password to change every 90 days. And so this is automatically set to that when you choose this suggested defaults. Unique passwords until reuse. A lot of times users will get lazy with passwords and they'll try to reuse the same password over and over again. This maintains a hash of the last 10 passwords, and so if those are attempted to be used a second time, it will block that. Minimum days between password change. This is disabled, but you can also set a policy that will force that there is a minimum days that must pass before they can go change the password again. And then this last one, maximum days account inactive until logout. So if a user doesn't log into a system for a long period of time, this will automatically lock their account. The last one here, auto logout after so many minutes of activity. Default here is 15 minutes. If we just sat here logged into the web UI for 15 minutes, it would automatically log us out. When you click the suggested defaults, it automatically makes it so that HTTP redirects to HTTPS. That's really important. You never want any traffic over the network being unencrypted. And then this last bit is the system use notification. Typically, government systems need to have a little message that pops up when you log in, so you can just paste in whatever the agency default message is, or government department message that should be posted there. To apply these set of rules, you just click OK. That applies it across all of the grid. So already you can see it logged us out, and that's because it switched things over to make sure that all access is coming in through HTTPS. So we're going to go in and say, yes, we accept the self-signed certificate in this case, and we're going to log back in. I haven't set a password on the admin account, and that's one of the first things we're going to go change next. Click acknowledge and accept, and now we can go and go about more of these configuration steps. So we've gone over how to make it so that all the web access is SSL TLS and that it's always going over HTTPS. It uses TLS 1.2. You can verify that just by looking here and looking at the site settings and certificate. Now we want to go and change the user password for the admin account. We're going to right click here and say set password. Well, let's go and try to give it a weak password, and you'll see what it does. So we'll just use the password of password1, and we'll click OK. And you'll see here, this is invalid per the password policy. It must be at least 10 characters in length. So we're going to go change this to something stronger. And see what it does now. And here it's saying I didn't use an uppercase letter. I put in password 123. So all of those different password policy rules go in and provide strong enforcement so that these accounts that are being set up to secure and manage the storage are very strong. So now that we've changed the password, it's going to have us log in again. And now we can log in as admin. It says that our account was modified since the last login because we changed the password. We got the security system use notice. And so now we've done some of the most important steps. Number one is setting up a strong password for the admin account, because the admin account can do all the various management features, access basically everything in the grid, and then enforcing strong security policies so that as we add more user accounts that they're going to be set up proper with strong rules around those password policies. And so now let's jump to this data at rest encryption. QuantaStor supports encryption for data at rest on all media types. You don't need to use special self-encrypting drives or full drive encryption at the hardware level. QuantaStor works with all media, whether it's NVMe or SATA or SAS. You can set up encrypted pools of storage, and QuantaStor encrypts it at the device level. So let's go and set up an encrypted pool of storage and talk about that in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to go back to the Storage Management tab. Let's go here and create a pool. So when you create a pool of storage, you're going to select what devices that you want to go into the pool. I'm just going to I'll select 4 devices here, and I'm going to go to the Encryption tab. So to enable encryption, you can do it in a single click. You can just check that box, and it's going to go and encrypt and not use a passphrase on the keys. This depends really on the environment. So here we're just going to set this up without a passphrase, and I'm just going to click OK. It's going to go generate some strong keys. QuantaStor uses the Intel RD-RAND system to generate true random data to go seed the DRBG 256-bit XTS encryption. And so this pool is all AES encrypted, and then that encryption is accelerated using another feature of the Intel chip, which is the AES-NI. Basically, it does a hardware offload of all the encryption and decryption, and that's really great for performance. Instead of there being a big degradation in performance with encryption enabled, because it uses the AES-NI feature of the chip, the performance degradation is typically no more than 10 to 15%. So our pool is created, it's encrypted. You can tell that it's an encrypted pool because there is a lock on it. And then you can get the keys out of the system. If you log in as a root to any QuantaStor system, the keys are going to be accessible under the etc cryptconf directory. So if you want to back up the keys, which we recommend backing them up onto a key server or moving them off of the system and having them get the keys from a key server at boot time, those are under the etc cryptconf keys directory. There's much more detail on the key handling and all of that on our wiki, which is at wiki.osnexus.com. So now we've covered data at rest encryption. Let's talk a little bit about audit logging. QuantaStor audit logs every single operation done by every single admin. And even if somebody doesn't successfully log in, that is audit logged. Everything is audit logged. And the audit log is not accessible through the GUI. You have to have root access to the QuantaStor systems. And then when you log in to a QuantaStor system, you can access the audit log and make a backup copy of it or review it. The audit log is never deleted, it is never pruned, it is always added to. So if you need the audit log to be pruned or something like that on a periodic basis, but it's never rotated, it's always added to. Generally, the amount of data going into the audit log is not that heavy, and so there's no real need to rotate it. So I'm going to pause the video and bring up a console and show you the audit log. Okay, I've brought up the audit log. I've kind of shrunk the font down a little bit so it's a little easier to take a look at some of these entries. We're looking at the last 3 lines of the audit log, and it's a little difficult to look at the audit log because we put it in JSON format. If this makes it very searchable and parsable if you've got an audit log processing system, but you can also just take these entries and put it into something that will pretty print this in JSON. In this case, the last thing that we did was we created that storage pool. And we created it as this user, identified by this ID, and then we ran the create storage pool operation, and then it starts giving us information about the task. So at the start of the task and the end of the task, and while it's running, every time the task transitions state, all of that goes into the audit log. And so we're getting a play-by-play of everything that was happening. So the log is located here in var log qs_audit.log. You can aggregate the logs from the different QuantaStor systems into a grid using whatever log collection system you want. You could tie it into Splunk or other utilities to go and gather that information. And again, it doesn't rotate so that it's there forever, and you'll be able to go and search the audit log back from the point in time that the system was first set up all the way to the current time. Next, let's talk about secure and scrub log collection and what that's all about. GDPR compliance means that any personally identifiable information needs to be handled properly. And that means that companies that go and collect information from computer systems that have information in there about that has personally identifiable information in it, IP addresses, all these kinds of things that might be able to be used as a attack vector to a corporation, or be able to identify which users are using a given system. All of that stuff needs to be scrubbed in order to be GDPR compliant. There's some various allowances in GDPR where that can be held for a certain amount of time. But at OS Nexus, we take the most secure route that we can, which means that the logs that we collect when you send logs, and that's something really important to state. QuantaStor never collects logs automatically. You have to explicitly send logs to QuantaStor or set a policy in the product that will tell it to go send logs, and we do not collect logs by default. When you do set that up, all of the logs are scrubbed before they're sent to OS Nexus. So there's no personally identifiable information. All the things that GDPR wants to be thrown out are already thrown out before the logs are sent to us. It's really important to us to ensure that the maximum amount of security on QuantaStor systems in the field. And so when we go through and send those logs, you know that they're being sent with just the information that's needed to go help and debug those systems. So let's go and send some logs. And so you get an idea of how to go do that in the product. You can just click here and say send support logs, choose which systems you want to send the logs from, and then click OK. And you're going to see it sending logs. As you can see it running here. It's running the log collection on all the different boxes here. And so there's a good amount of data that it's collecting, but it's never collecting any data out of the pools. So it's only the information about the health of the system and those things that the support team needs in order to debug and triage configuration and maintenance issues. The logs are encrypted and sent to QuantaStor as an encrypted bundle to our log server, so they're also encrypted on the wire before being scrubbed and sent to us. Okay, so that covers secure log collection and our log scrubbing. Now let's talk about firewalls. If you have a system set up to do scale-out file storage, then you could turn off access to iSCSI and some of the other protocols that might not be needed for your environment. And so the way to go do that in QuantaStor is in a couple of different places. One is at a per system level. So here we can go to QuantaStor 90 and say modify storage system. And if you go to the firewall tab, we can go and turn on and off access to different things. If we're not going to be using the QuantaStor REST API to go and automate things from scripts and things like that using the REST API, you can just block that. If you don't want anybody coming in through the web management interface on a given box, you can turn that off as well. If we are going to block iSCSI, you can just block it there. You can block NFS that way. And if you're not using Ceph communication between the nodes, if you're not setting up a Ceph scale-out cluster, you can block all of those ports as well. So this goes and applies a block across all network ports on the system. The other way that you can go and set up the firewall is to go to specific ports where you want to control the firewall rules. Like let's say on this particular port on QS90 that we're going to use that for management, but we don't want it used for anything else, and we want to make sure that the management port can't be used for data access. We can then say modify network port, and there's a firewall tab for that as well. The default mode for these ports is to go inherit the rules, the firewall rules, from what is set at the system. And that way you can set it at the system and have it apply to all the ports automatically. But if we say this is a management port and we don't want it to provide any SMB or other data protocol access, we can go and block all of those protocols and apply that. And it's going to go modify that port and block all that protocol access to 192. To that particular port. And so you've got this granularity to be able to control the firewall both at a port level and at a complete system level and have it inherit some defaults. Okay, so that covers firewalls. Now we're going to talk a little bit about alert notifications. One of the most important things is to go and set up the grid so that you get notified when the box needs maintenance, whether that's replacing a bad hard drive that's worn out, or worn out flash media. Could be thermal issues that are detected. All those things, whether it's a hardware issue or a software configuration issue, all those things QuantaStor is going to generate alert for. There's over 200 things that QuantaStor can generate alerts on that it detects and looks for. Everything from memory check exceptions to like the thermals that I was mentioning. Those are all well and good, but if you haven't set up the alerting to notify your IT team when maintenance is required, that doesn't do much good. So let's talk a little bit about how to go and set up the alert notification. Inside of the main storage management tab, there's a button here for the alert manager, and that's right there in the main section. Just click on that and it's going to bring up the alert manager. QuantaStor does not run an SMTP server on the interior. You need to have it communicate out through your own SMTP server. If you don't want to use email, there's other options. QuantaStor integrates with PagerDuty and Slack and also Mattermost. So you can put in a webhook, which is basically a URL for sending REST APIs to, and QuantaStor will send out alerts on those mechanisms as well. And it sends it out on all of the configured mechanisms. So if you set up PagerDuty and Slack and email, all of the alerts will go out through all of those mechanisms. The alerts you'll see in the GUI as well. Here we have 2 alerts. This is from some earlier configuration that I did where I deleted a virtual interface, and this particular system was removed from the grid. So these were alert messages that popped up. Those messages, they're at the warning level. They would automatically go out to all the various configured mechanisms. The next bit here is the capacity alert thresholds. When your system gets low on space, you're going to want to get alerted so that you don't run out of space, because pools, when they get to 100% full, all the write I/O is going to get blocked, and that can bring the pool to a stop. So make sure that you always have at least 30% free space on all of your storage pools. When you get beyond less than 30% free, you should be working on expanding those pools and or adding additional systems if you have the scale out cluster set up. So that's what these are. At certain levels, we're going to start sending out warnings, and then urgent, and then critical messages, and those all go out as alerts. The last bit here is sometimes rarely does this happen, because QuantaStor throttles these alerts pretty well, so that it doesn't, if there's a particular alert, it's not going to go send it out multiple times per minute. It's got a system by which it makes sure that it doesn't get too annoying when there's a problem. But if you are seeing a lot of a particular alert message, say you are having drop packets in your network environment, you can just disable that alert and then apply that change. And now grid-wide, you're not going to get any alerts on any drop packets. Drop packets are a fairly normal thing, but QuantaStor alerts on it when we see a heavy amount of drop packets. That's how you can go and change some of the alerting policies and how to set up alerting with QuantaStor. Anytime you go and change the alerting settings, use this button, click OK to apply it, and then bring it back up, or hit apply, and then you can start testing your alert settings. This is a message that you can put anything you want in. Make sure that you send it as an error or a warning instead of informational. And then these will make it out to all the different users that are set up to receive alerts. And you want to make sure that you are getting those. If you set up email alerts, that you do receive an email for this when we send the alert out. You can see it shows up in the UI, but this would go out through all the configured mechanisms. And if you're not seeing the alerts, then you want to make sure you get those settings adjusted so that until you are. So be sure to test the alert system after configuration changes. Alert settings are also available on a per user basis. So for the admin account, we could go and set up alert subscriptions for each user account. So I can go create a user, Steve, and then I can have my own email address separate from the admin account to get notified. Let's take a look at multi-factor authentication next. Inside of the users and groups section, there's a button here for multi-factor authentication. And the way that this works is it integrates with Cisco's Duo. We're working on tying it in with other MFA mechanisms, but basically you put in some information that you would get from your Duo account. This is just a friendly display name and description. You can put anything in there that you want. For the API host and integration key and secret key, you're going to get all of this from your Duo account. And so once you put this information in, then you'll be able to start to configure user accounts and force them to use multi-factor authentication when they log into the QuantaStor system. After that has been added and we've created an entry, there's this assign unassign. And this is where we can go in and assign specific users to the accounts that we want to force to use multi-factor authentication. Right now it's disabled for both of these accounts. I haven't set up multi-factor authentication, but you would basically, after putting in those credentials and tying the QuantaStor grid to your Cisco Duo system account, you would then go in and switch over the rules on these different administrator accounts and make sure that they're using multi-factor authentication. So it's saying I don't have it fully set up, but that's basically all there is to it. Log into Duo, get the credentials needed to add these systems, put that in here under Create, and then when that's done, assign and unassign the rules for how they must log in, and then it's all said and done. The other area here is that you can also modify the user and control multi-factor authentication here as well. So once it's configured so that QuantaStor is tied in to your MFA system, you can then check and uncheck this. Right now there's no MFA credentials that are set up, so it's just graying these options out. But you can set up MFA on a per user here, or you can use the other dialog and set it to a group of users all at once. Okay, and that brings us to the last topic, which is role-based access controls. What we're going to do is we're going to go in and set up a new role and talk a little bit about how to create those roles and scope them to very limited permissions. So the way that you go and create a new role is you go to the management roles section here. The admin account is always there. You can't delete the QuantaStor admin account. It's a mandatory account. You should set it to a very strong password. But let's go and dive into creating a new role. When we create a new role, the default settings here are none on everything, basically saying that this role has no access to do anything. And if we were going to go set up a role that was going to be used by a script, we could just say something like provisioning script and or scripts. And this role, maybe we want it to be able to go and create a new network share automatically on, say, some periodic basis. And maybe we want it to be able to list shares and snapshot shares. So we could give it just these three permissions. This is not enough permissions to actually log in via the UI, but you would be able to use the command line utility or the REST API to go and call the snapshot, to go and call commands like get and list these shares, and you'd be able to create new shares. So that's all there is to creating a very, very limited role, and we can click on the permissions for that role, and you can see it can only do three things: view, snapshot, and create. So now we can go create a user account for that can have that has that assigned. So we can say this is a script user 1, and this is going to get assigned to that new provisioning scripts role, and then we put in a nice strong password here, and then this script user can and so now we can create that user, and now we can start running scripts, and we don't really have to worry too much if the password for that particular account got lost or breached, because the damage that they could do with this is super limited. Creating thin provision network shares or creating a lot of snapshots might create a bit of a headache, but there's not going to be any data breach or data loss by it just going into the system and telling it to create a bunch of these resources. So that's one technique for making it so that you've got really scoped rules or limits on a given account. A lot of times, though, you will want accounts that they can actually log into the UI with. And to log into the UI, you're going to need visibility to more objects than just the network shares. If we were to try to log in as this script user, it would basically not let us in, and you'd basically be able to see next to nothing in the UI. But let's go and create a role that's more like a provisioning administrator instead of a provisioning script. And so what we're going to do is, instead of starting with nothing, we're going to take and copy all of the permissions from the system monitor role. The system monitor role has view permissions for all the different types of objects. So when we go here, you can see that when they log in, they can go in and view everything in the system, but you can also see that their permissions on everything else is none, which means that when they log in, they might be able to go and look to see, are we seeing, you'd be able to see the alerts and stuff like that. They wouldn't be able to clear alerts, but they'd be able to go in and view the system and see if there was anything wrong. So that's kind of a good thing, and we could call this sort of like a junior administrator, or say maybe a provisioning administrator. Let's go and give this administrator some rights to go and create some network shares, and we'll give this administrator the right to create some storage volumes. So as you can see here, every single permission in QuantaStor is identified by its object type and the operation that you can do on that object type. And the third element, which is really important, is the scope. The system and global scope means that that permission is accessible on all the systems in the grid. So these are equivalent to each other. The user scope means that the ownership of the object must be owned by the user in order for that user to do this particular operation on it, in this case, create. So when you create objects, when you're logged in, you automatically get ownership of the things that you are provisioning from a security management perspective within the system. You can go in and change that later. Generally, for somebody that's just going to be administrating the grid and you just want them to be able to do all the things or provisioning throughout the grid, you just do it as a system or global scope. Resource group means that the multi-tenancy system has been set up, mainly a resource group with a bunch of resources in it. And in this case, you'll be able to provision from pools that are within the resource group to create new storage volumes. So that's what that's about. The most common one is to just provide system-wide access to these different rules. But the granularity and the permission scope really makes it really powerful to be able to use the grid and share and delegate control to different departments while also scoping visibility to different portions of the storage grid. So here, again, provisioning administrator, they can go and create volumes. They can go and view the different objects. I'm going to click OK. And this is, you'll see this new role come in. And again, you can see it can view everything. But it doesn't have permissions to create anything except for the network shares and the storage volumes. So it's that easy to go in and create new custom roles. And then once you have created a custom role, you can now assign users to that role. So here I've created an account called Steve, and I want to go modify that user and actually change it so he's no longer an admin, but he's a provisioning admin. You can just go in there and modify it, click OK, and now that user is part of the provisioning administrator. So in QuantaStor, you set a single role for each user rather than multiple different roles, and that role controls what they have access to in terms of APIs. Everything that you see here in terms of permissions is enforced across all systems in the grid immediately. So if I was logged in as user Steve, it doesn't matter which system, and I applied that change and I tried to delete a network share, that would get blocked immediately and would disallow that operation. In fact, let's go ahead, create a network share, and then we'll log out and then log in as Steve. And then you'll see, we'll call this share 1, and we'll try to go in and delete it. So here's share 1. You can see I'm currently logged in as admin. I'm going to log out, and now I'm going to go log back in as Steve. All right. Now I'm logged in as Steve. I got the system use notification that we saw from earlier. I've got this role that's very, very limited. I can't do anything but go and create shares. I can't delete them. So let's go through and try to do something that I'm not allowed to do. I'm not allowed to delete shares. Let's go click OK. Yeah, I want to go do that. Sorry, can't do that. Authorization check has failed for user Steve. You'll notice this double square bracket on a lot of the messages where we're talking about usernames. The reason why we have these double square brackets is it makes it easier for us to scrub personally identifiable information from the logs before they're sent to OS Nexus. So by policy, all of the different parts of the product, anytime they have to reference a name of a user, you'll see it with these double square brackets. Let's go now and try to do something that we are allowed to do. We're allowed to go and create shares. So let's go through and create share 2, which we are allowed to go do, and let's click OK. And you can see the task is running and it's complete because that's part of our role. And that's really how easy it is to go set up custom roles in QuantaStor. Highly recommend that you go through, create limited roles that follow that principle of least privilege so that you don't have to worry about administrators having access to operations that be things that you wouldn't want them doing. That covers everything I wanted to cover today. There's some other aspects to security configuration for QuantaStor and more detail on that in the wiki.osnexus.com if you go to our main documentation site. But those steps that we went through there today cover the primary things that you need to set up whenever you deploy a new QuantaStor grid and want to get it locked down for a secure environment. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, send us an email at info@osnexus.com. Thanks.